Tonight, I want you to come with me for a little while. Not into a city, not into crowds. Into a place most people pretend not to see. A house at the edge of town, empty in daylight, restless at night. Some places keep secrets. Some places keep voices. This is a memory. This is a warning. This is the Whispering House, Part 1. Arrival. I never believed in houses that were haunted. Not really. I believed in leaks, in rodents, in sagging roofs. I believed in practical things. But there are nights. Nights when the air tastes wrong, when practical explanations begin to feel thin. One of those nights, I found myself standing at the rusted gate of the house on Hollow Street. It was a place people walked around. They crossed the road when they had to pass it. Parents tugged children closer on summer nights. I had heard the rumors. Small town whispers, a family that left in a hurry, a child who wandered and never returned, neighbors who swore they heard singing from inside the walls. They all made good, nervous conversation. But rumor is not proof. Silence is not proof either. The house looked tired in a way that ages pain into posture. Paint hung in strips. Windows gaped, dark and empty like pupils. The porch sagged, and the door, slightly ajar, moved when the wind hit it, inviting and hostile in the same breath. I told myself 1,000 reasons to go back. Curiosity is a funny thing. It is equal parts boredom and hunger. I told myself I would peek in and be out within 5 minutes. I told myself there would be cobwebs and cigarette butts, maybe the skeleton of a chair. I told myself it would be nothing. The front hall swallowed what light there was. My flashlight beam trembled on wallpaper patterned with flowers that had long since died. The floorboards sighed under my boots. The air was colder than outside, and it carried an earth-sour smell, like damp basements and closed drawers. There was a hush that felt deliberate, as if the house was holding its breath to listen. And then I heard it. Soft at first, the kind of noise you could almost convince yourself was the old house settling. But it wasn't the house settling. It was a sound shaped like words, thin and patient. A whisper, not yet forming into a phrase, just pressure behind the ear, a breath that brushed against the bones. Go, away. My jaw tightened. I told myself it was the wind, but the breeze could not name me. The whisper edged away from vowels and consonants and pressed itself against meaning. It felt like a name called underwater, familiar and ruined. I moved deeper. Rooms opened into rooms. Kitchen with rusted sink, parlor with a piano swollen from humidity, a mantel crowded with dust. Family photographs sat in crooked frames, faces blurred by decades and sun. One small photograph had been turned face down deliberately, like a secret folded inward. The more I stepped, the more I felt watched. Not by eyes, but by expectation. As though the house waited for me to ask it for something it had been keeping. I found a stairway, narrow and dark, and I climbed. Each step was a complaint, wood-rubbed wood with an old patience. At the top, a hallway extended like a throat. Doors stood sentry on either side. Only one was left cracked open. At the far end, a single seam of darkness. I knew something in the house kept its attention there, and I walked toward it. Part 2. Strange Occurrences. The room at the end of the hall was colder than the rest of the house. Your breath makes paper lanterns inside your chest when you see cold like that. Moonlight cut through crooked blinds and drew a pale, rectangular path across the floorboards. On the path sat a book, a little leather journal, spine gnarled, edges eaten by age. I picked it up. The leather was brittle, and when I opened it, the paper whispered. The handwriting inside crawled across each page, at first steady, then slanted and frantic. The first entry was small, neat, neighborly. The entries later were not. It watches at night. One page read, it listens in the pipes. It learns the sound of us. Don't say its name. Don't answer it if it calls. Another line, it is patient. It collects small things. It hungers for sound. I should have left then. I should have closed the journal and walked away, with my head full of common sense, and the smell of night on my coat. But curiosity, that old wolf, would not let me. I read until the words became blurred, until the ink bled into my eyes, and the whisper in the room grew louder. Not outside, not in the hall, it was in the floorboard beneath me, behind the walls, and then, suddenly, it was inside my ear, as if someone had leaned in. I heard syllables like bones rubbing. Listen, listen. The sound seemed to attach itself to the air. I pressed my palms to my ears, and then staggered back when the sound came clearer. Remember me. The journal's last entries were written in a rush. The letters slanted as though the writer had been running while they wrote. They described voices that learned the shape of names, voices that threaded through pipes and chimneys, voices that waited until sunset, then crept into sleep. I dropped the journal onto the floor, and the sound cut. Silence slammed into me like a door. For a breathless second, I thought I had made the house notice me in a way that was dangerous. I felt ridiculous. I laughed in a small, dry sound, and told myself stories. Mice under the floor, wind through fractured glazing, a neighbor with a radio left on, then the radio in the hall. There had been no radio in the house when I came in, clicked on. A station hummed, a garbled song played, and then the static cleared to a voice whispering my name. Not the voice of the radio, but a soft, layered thing that echoed right behind my left ear. I moved outward, faster now, a sound under my tongue that wanted to become a prayer. The house answered in half-breaths and shudders. Doors that had been shut a moment before creaked open, one window flung wide as if an invisible hand had pushed it. On the mantel, I saw a set of keys on a ring. They looked recent. They clinked as though someone had just dropped them. And then, as I watched, they stopped moving. The whispers said nothing. They only waited. It is the waiting that is worse than any shout. It implies an appetite. I realized, with a cold and heavy clarity, that the house wanted me to stay, wanted the sound of me to add to its chorus. It wanted me to speak, to name, to answer. There is a hunger in some silence, a kind that is coaxing and polite and rotting. I ran. I don't know how long I kept moving through the rooms, hands sliding along wallpaper, eyes stinging with the dust of dust. When I reached the front door, my hand found the knob cool and steady. I pushed it, and for a second it caught as if on a lip, then gave, and I spilled out into the night. The gate scraped. The world outside smelled like ordinary things again, cars, heated concrete, distant music. I told myself it was over, that a thrill had ended, but even then, at the edge of the porch, I heard, soft and satisfied, "Come back." I left, but the whisper did not stay inside the house. It glued itself to my collar, hummed beneath my clothes, low and familiar as a memory. That night I slept little. Sleep is not restful when something in your head practices saying your name. Part 3. The truth revealed. I tried to forget. I tried rational explanations, senior prank, drift radio, a neighbor's cunning, but small things accumulated like snow. My phone, sitting on my bedside table, filled with a message I did not remember allowing, a single photo, blurred and grey. It was taken from inside the house. I looked in the photo at the hallway with its one cracked door, and, in the doorway, a darker rectangle that could have been shadow or a shape. I went back. This time, I told myself I would bring a recorder. A friend. Anyone. I went alone. Some stubborn part of me wanted proof that I was not losing my mind. Some part of me was not so certain anymore. That I wanted the answer. The house accepted me like a tide accepts a stone. Inside, the cold was worse, as if the rooms had been waiting for the warmth I carried, and intended to use it. The journal was gone from the floor where I had left it. In its place lay a child's shoe. Scuffed and small, I touched it. It was warm, warm enough that I jerked my hand back. A slow sound began in the walls, like someone shuffling papers far away. Like the pages of a book turning themselves, the whispers multiplied, and names layered over one another. Some were old-sounding, foreign, some were tiny and high. The sound of children trying to learn words. I followed the sound to the attic, where the house opened into a green gloom of rafters and roofs. There, under a sheet, something had been left, a chair, facing the rafters. Like an audience member waiting for a show, strung from the beams were small things, buttons, a dried flower, a broken doll's eye, objects collected with the quiet passion of a thing that remembers. They swayed without wind, beneath the chair. In the dust, I found a name carved shallowly into the floor. My breath stalled at it, Ella. My mind made protests. How many Ellas had lived and died? And yet that name tugged with the particularity of a hand upon cloth. I pressed my fingers to the cut in the wood. The whisper rose, eager and then reverent, like a congregation recognizing a chosen voice. Ella, Ella, remember. The attic windows fogged. The sound resolved into a phrase. Then another. The house kept saying fragments from the journal, warnings. Please. The last frantic scrawlings. And then, very quietly, I understood. The house had swallowed up the voices of the people who had once been its voices. It kept them like a radio keeps recorded songs. Those whispered names were not benign memories. They were something else, echoes that had grown teeth. I remember the journal line most clearly now. It wants a voice. It wants to be heard. The house was not only listening, it had learned to imitate the tones it had heard. It could call in voices that sounded like comfort, like love. That, I realized with an ice in my blood, was the cruelest trick. The house could sound like home, and home is the easiest place to let your guard down. Part 4. The final knock. I did not move for a long time in that attic. Only when the weight of what I had seen pressed heavy did I make for the stairs. The house felt patient, pleased, even that I had come so far. The hair at the back of my neck stood like bristles. At the bottom of the stairwell I paused. The front door was visible through the curtain of the hall. Outside the windows, the street lay quiet as glass. I should have left, but I wanted one last look, to prove to myself I had not been foolish, to make the house powerless by naming it. I crossed the threshold between inside and hall, and it happened. A sound, slow and deliberate, 3 knocks at the front door. Not a polite knock, not a scrape, heavy, purposeful, like someone rapping long and patient on an old coffin lid. Knock, knock, knock. The sound traveled up through my feet, into the bones. It had a rhythm that matched something in the house. The walls answered with a shudder, as if remembering some old drumbeat. The whispers rose, not pleading now, but expectant. Open, open it. I thought of the child's shoe, the name carved in the attic, the way the house dressed itself in familiar voices. If I opened the door, the house would not offer comfort, it would open a mouth. It would let that chorus spill out into the night and follow me home. My hands trembled. The knob was cold under my palm. I could taste metal in my mouth. The whisper breathed at my shoulder in the voice of someone I had once loved, soft, coaxing. We missed you. The house had learned how to use mercy as bait. I jammed my shoulder into the door and pulled. It opened outward onto the night. The porch. Light was out. The street was empty, no figure, no shadow, nothing but a thin mist that moved like breath. The knock stopped immediately. The silence afterward was not comfort, it was hunger disappointed. I could have closed the door, I could have sealed it, but some doors do not stay shut once they have been noticed. Once you have heard a thing name you, you carry its name with you. For weeks I heard the faint shape of a knock in my sleep. 4 months the whisper curled around my phone when it rang, a soft overlay on every voice I heard. People asked why I had gone in. I had no good reason. Why had I come back? Foolishness, stubbornness, the same human error that invites a disaster into proof. I tell this story now as a caution, not to prod at voyeuristic horror, but because small curiosities can open doors that do not close. If you ever see a house at the edge of town that seems to watch, the best thing to do is keep walking. If you ever hear a whisper that sounds like your name, do not answer. Some houses remember us. Some houses want to keep us talking forever. Some doors knock back. The house is still there. People still cross the street to avoid it. The last time I passed by, the curtains shifted, and I felt the whisper brush the skin of my neck, faint as a thought and nearly human. If you like this narration, subscribe to Gothic and Horror Classics. We read classics and write new ones, stories that disturb and linger. Leave a comment. Would you open the door if it knocked 3 times? And remember, when you hear a knock in the night, think twice before you answer. Knock, knock, knock.